On Halloween, my daughter-in-law said the witches were out, and she laughed, looking right at me. But when my son arrived, everything changed. I never thought those words would come out of my mouth. Today, I'm going to tell you a story I never thought I'd share. And if you, for a single second, feel like this sounds familiar, I just ask that you hit the like button and subscribe. It will help me keep venting. That night, October 31st, my own house in Charleston, South Carolina, felt like a stage set for my humiliation. Orange lights flickered like mocking eyes in every corner. The silver candelabras I inherited from my mother shone on the dining room table, and laughter filled the air with that hollow sound of people who feign affection while secretly calculating how much they can bleed you for. My name is Eleanor Hayes, though everyone has called me Ellie my whole life. I'm 68 years old, and for 3 decades, I've lived in this white stone house with a central courtyard, right in the heart of the historic district of Charleston. My late husband, Richard, worked his entire life as an engineer and managed to amass a considerable fortune. Properties, stock market investments, bank accounts generating enough dividends to keep the whole family comfortable without anyone ever having to worry about money. But that Halloween night, as I adjusted the standard gray wool cardigan I wear to bed, the one I'd thrown on without enthusiasm because I wasn't in the mood for costumes, I didn't imagine my own home would become the theater of my destruction. Tiffany Vance, my daughter-in-law, appeared in the doorway like an apparition. She wore a black lace dress clinging to her figure, a pointed hat adorned with silver sequins, and her lips were painted a crimson so intense it looked like fresh blood. Her costume, the most powerful witch of the night, she announced with that shrill voice that always grates on my nerves. When she entered my living room, she lifted her goblet of Cabernet like a sacred chalice and dramatically yelled, "Watch out, folks! The witches are taking flight tonight." Everyone laughed. My grandchildren, confused but caught up in the adults' forced gaiety, clapped too. My youngest daughter, Sarah, smiled awkwardly from the sofa where she held her baby. The guests, neighbors, distant relatives, raised their glasses in a toast I didn't understand. Then Tiffany turned toward me. Her eyes gleamed with the malice I had learned to recognize but always pretended to ignore. She looked me up and down, from my gray hair pulled back in a simple ponytail to my comfortable nursing shoes, and delivered the line that broke my spirit. Although, looks like one of them already landed right here, didn't she? The silence lasted barely a second before the burst of hysterical laughter erupted, as if she had told the funniest joke in the world. My grandchildren laughed without understanding, because children repeat what they see adults applaud. Sarah bit her lip and looked down. The neighbors exchanged knowing glances, as if to say, finally, someone had the nerve to say it. And I stood there, in my own living room, feeling like an old piece of furniture that everyone views with contempt, but no one dares to throw out because it's still somewhat useful. I felt something snap inside. It wasn't my heart. That would have been too clean, too fast. It was something deeper, rawer, like the sound of old wood splintering under too much weight, as if all the humiliations I had swallowed for years had finally reached their breaking point. My son, Michael, hadn't arrived yet. He worked in Manhattan, managing multi-million-dollar investments for an international firm, and was always late to our family gatherings. "Business doesn't wait," he used to say, and I, as always, waited. No one defended me. Not a single person present had the courage to say, "Hey, that's not right to talk to Ellie that way." Not even my own daughter, who just mumbled under her breath, "Oh, Mom, don't take it so seriously. It's just a joke. A joke. Right. A joke that cuts deep, that bleeds, that makes you feel invisible in your own house." While everyone continued laughing and toasting, I headed to the kitchen. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to cry without anyone seeing me. But Tiffany followed me even there, a glass of champagne in her hand, and that expensive French perfume that churned my stomach. "Does it bother you that I make jokes, Mrs. Eleanor?" she asked with that practiced fake smile. "No, dear. I just think respect shouldn't be something you only dress up for once a year," I replied, trying to maintain my composure. "Oh, please, don't be so sensitive. You should relax more. At your age, A sense of humor is the only thing that saves you from becoming a bitter old broad, right? She said it looking straight into my eyes, with the calculated cruelty of someone who knows exactly where to plunge the knife for maximum pain. I felt nauseous, but also something new, a spark of rage I hadn't experienced in years. And besides, she continued, sipping her champagne, if you want respect, start by not meddling so much in your son's life. Michael needs freedom. He doesn't need a witch hovering over him, monitoring every dime he spends. There it was. The cursed word again, witch. But this time not as a joke, but as a diagnosis. As if my motherly love, my legitimate concern, my right to have an opinion on the money I myself had helped generate, were symptoms of a disease that needed to be cured with silence and submission. I swallowed hard and didn't respond, because I knew if I opened my mouth, I would cry. And if I cried in front of her, she would have definitely won. That night, when everyone had left and the house was empty, I sat in the central courtyard where Richard and I used to drink coffee every morning. The quarry stone fountain still sounded the same, but I was no longer the same woman who had woken up that morning. For the first time in my 68 years, I understood what it meant to be completely alone while surrounded by family. The wound from that Halloween night did not heal. For the next few days, whenever I closed my eyes, I heard those laughs echoing in my ears like funeral bells. But what hurt the most wasn't the public humiliation. It was the revelation of something I had been denying for months. My family saw me as a costly obstacle, not the matriarch who had sacrificed her entire life for them. Since Michael married Tiffany 2 years ago, my house had stopped feeling like mine. She started showing up every Tuesday and Friday with her own key, which my son had given her without consulting me, and rearranged my spaces as if she were the owner. She replaced the white linen curtains I had chosen so carefully with beige ones that, according to her, were more contemporary. She moved the living room furniture, including Richard's favorite armchair, where he used to read the paper every morning for 30 years. "Don't worry, mother-in-law," she had told me with that condescending smile I knew so well. "Your style is very dated. I'm going to give this house a contemporary touch." Contemporary touch. That's what she called erasing my life. But the physical changes were nothing compared to the transformations in family relationships. Before, my children called me at least 3 times a week. Michael would tell me about his investments, ask my advice on handling his stock portfolio. Sarah came every Sunday with her kids so I could prepare my classic pot roast. That recipe I learned from my mother, which had been a sacred ritual in our family for decades. Now, the calls were reduced to cold, distant conversations. Michael barely phoned once every 2 weeks, always in a rush, always with the background noise of his Midtown East office in Manhattan, where he managed multi-million-dollar investment portfolios for international clients. "I'm really busy, Mom," was his favorite phrase. "The crypto market never sleeps, you know." Sarah had changed too. Where there used to be spontaneous laughter and mother-daughter confidences, now I only found monosyllabic answers and a palpable tension every time I mentioned something about Tiffany. "Mom, don't exaggerate," she would say when I tried to express my discomfort. "Tiffany says you're being incredibly negative lately." Tiffany says. Those 2 words had become the gospel governing my children's opinions of me. As if a woman who had known my family for barely 2 years had more authority over my character than I did after 68 years of life. The first financial blow came disguised as a family opportunity. One November afternoon, Tiffany showed up at my house with a black leather folder tucked under her arm, and that executive attitude she adopted when she wanted something important. "We need to discuss the future, Mrs. Eleanor," she said, sitting on my sofa as if it were her private office. "Michael and I have been analyzing some very promising investment opportunities." There was something in her tone that put me on high alert. I knew her well enough to know that when she talked about us and the future, it generally meant she had found a new way to access my capital. "What kind of opportunities?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "A gourmet coffee franchise in Midtown East. You know, the most exclusive business district in Manhattan. It's an area where the square footage costs millions of dollars, where the executives handling multi-billion-dollar investment funds get their daily coffee." She opened the folder and spread out a series of documents printed on thick paper across my coffee table, with colorful graphs and financial projections that looked very professional. Look at these numbers, mother-in-law. The initial investment is only $4 million, but projections indicate we'll recover the capital in 18 months. After that, it's pure profit. We're talking about a 30% annual return, $4 million. She said it with the same casualness one asks for a cup of sugar. To her, my money was just an abstract figure in a bank account, not the result of decades of hard work and savings. Did Michael review these numbers? I asked. Of course. He's the one who found the opportunity. You know how he is with business. He's always analyzing market trends, studying where to invest to multiply the capital. Something wasn't right. If Michael had really found such a good opportunity, why hadn't he talked to me directly? Why was he sending his wife to negotiate with me? I'd like to speak with him before making any decisions, I said. Tiffany's smile tightened slightly, but she maintained her composure. Of course, but he's at an international conference on Bitcoin and digital assets this week. He won't be available until next Monday. And this opportunity has a deadline of Friday. There was always an urgency. There was always a deadline. There was always a reason why I couldn't take the necessary time to reflect or consult with anyone else. Besides, she continued, don't you trust your own son? Michael has been managing multi-million-dollar investments for years. His experience in the stock market and digital assets is internationally recognized. There was the emotional hook. My motherly love converted into a weapon of manipulation, as if doubting this specific investment meant doubting my son's talent and capacity. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked through the empty house, observing every corner where I had built a life, every photograph that told my family's story. On the hallway wall hung Michael's graduation photo as an industrial engineer, smiling alongside Richard and me. In his eyes shone gratitude toward the parents who had worked tirelessly to pay for his elite private education. Next to it was the photo of his wedding to Tiffany. In that picture, my daughter-in-law was embracing me with a smile I then believed was genuine. Now, looking at it from my new perspective, I could see something calculating in her eyes, as if she was already assessing how much she could gain from the family welcoming her with open arms. Friday arrived faster than expected. Tiffany appeared promptly at 9 in the morning with the documents already prepared for signing. I just need your authorization for the wire transfer, she said, placing a gold pen on the paper. Michael has already coordinated everything with the bank. Your liquid assets are more than sufficient for this investment. I signed. God, how I hate myself for signing. But I did it thinking of my son, his future, the possibility that he might finally find the economic independence he had always sought. $4 million vanished from my account that same afternoon. Weeks passed, and there were no further updates on the coffee franchise. When I asked Tiffany about the project's progress, she always had perfectly reasonable excuses. Problems with municipal permits, delays in local remodeling, complications with international suppliers. 2 months later, when I finally managed to speak directly with Michael over the phone, I discovered the most bitter truth. What coffee shop, Mom? I never mentioned a coffee shop. What are you talking about? His confusion sounded genuine. Too genuine. Tiffany told me you had found an investment opportunity in Midtown East. The silence on the other end of the line lasted an eternity. Mom, I have to hang up. I have a very important meeting with foreign investors. We'll talk later. He hung up, and later never came. That night, sitting in my courtyard while the quarry stone fountain sounded the same as always, I understood that I had been the victim of the cruelest scam, the one executed by someone who knows your emotional weaknesses and uses them to destroy you from the inside. The days after discovering the truth about the missing money became a silent torture. Every morning I woke up hoping it had all been a nightmare, but reality hit me when I checked my bank statement. $4 million simply evaporated, as if they had never existed. Tiffany stopped coming to the house. Her Tuesday and Friday visits, which used to annoy me so much, now became an absence that screamed her guilt. When I called her phone, it always went straight to voicemail with that cheerful recording that now sounded like mockery. Hi, I can't answer right now, but leave me a message and I'll call you back as soon as possible. She never returned the calls. Michael didn't speak to me either. The few times I managed to communicate with him, his responses were clipped, almost aggressive, as if I were the one to blame for something I couldn't grasp. "Mom, I told you I'm extremely busy. We're closing a very complicated Bitcoin operation with Dubai investors. I don't have time for conversations that lead nowhere. Son, I just want to know what happened with the money that—" "What money?" "I already explained that I never authorized any transfer. If you gave money to Tiffany without consulting me, that's your problem, not mine. My problem. My own son was telling me that being scammed by his wife was my problem." The loneliness became physical, like a constant weight in my chest that made it hard to breathe. The house, which used to fill with the voices of my grandchildren on weekends, now remained in a sepulchral silence. Sarah had stopped bringing the kids for the Sunday pot roast. When I asked her why, she gave me an answer that broke my heart. "Oh, Mom, it's just that you're being incredibly negative lately. The kids pick up on these things. Tiffany says you need professional help, that maybe you should talk to someone about, the changes of age. The changes of age. As if my pain were a symptom of age-related cognitive decline, not a consequence of having been betrayed by the people I loved most. My 69th birthday arrived on a gray Tuesday in February. I woke up expecting at least a call, a text message, any sign that my family remembered the date. I made coffee for 2 out of habit, although I knew no one would come to join me. Richard always brought me red roses on my birthday, 24 roses for every year we had been married. The last time was 48 roses that I still keep dry in my memory album. The phone didn't ring all day. At 6 in the evening, as the sun began to set over the rooftops of Charleston, I received a text message from Sarah. "Happy birthday, Mom. Sorry I couldn't call. Busy with the kids. Love you." A text message. 24 words to summarize 69 years of life. Michael didn't send anything. That night, while eating a slice of cake I had bought for myself at the corner bakery, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to hire a private investigator to find out what had really happened to my money. The detective's name was Robert Martinez, a man in his 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor but an impeccable reputation. His office was in the historic Broad Street Legal District in Charleston, in a colonial building that smelled of old paper and guarded secrets. "Mrs. Hayes," he told me after hearing my story, "what you describe is a very common family fraud scheme. It usually involves emotional manipulation, falsification of documents, and, in many cases, complicity from the spouse." Complicity? Are you saying my son knew what was happening? It's a possibility we have to consider. In my experience, these operations require access to very specific information about the victim's assets. Information that normally only direct family members know. Robert's words resonated in my head for days. Was it possible that Michael was involved from the start? That his apparent surprise over the phone had been just well-acted theater? 2 weeks later, Robert called me with news that confirmed my worst suspicions. "Mrs. Hayes, I need you to come to my office. I found something you need to see personally." When I arrived, Robert had spread out a series of photographs and bank documents on his desk that made my stomach turn. "Your daughter-in-law, Tiffany Vance, opened a bank account in the Cayman Islands 3 days after receiving the money from you. The account is under the name of a shell corporation called Golden Investments LLC. He showed me the photographs. Tiffany entering and leaving a bank branch in Manhattan, signing documents, smiling as she completed transactions that stole my future. But here's the most painful part, Mrs. Hayes. Look at these transfers." Robert pointed to a series of banking movements printed on official paper. My heart stopped when I saw the names. Transfers from Tiffany's account to a personal account belonging to Michael Hayes. "Your son received $8 million of that $4 million you invested. The rest remains in your daughter-in-law's offshore account." The tears came before I could stop them. They weren't tears of sadness, but of pure, impotent rage. My own son, the person I had worked for my whole life, for whom I had saved every dollar, for whom I had sacrificed my own dreams and desires, had stolen from me with the same coldness one steals from a stranger. "Is there any way to get the money back?" I asked when I managed to regain my composure. "Legally, it's very complicated. Offshore accounts are specifically designed to protect assets from lawsuits and legal proceedings. Furthermore, we would have to prove that you were a victim of fraud, Not that you made a voluntary investment that went wrong. But I have the documents for the supposed franchise. Documents that you signed voluntarily, Mrs. Hayes. Without witnesses to confirm you were deceived. Without recordings of the conversations where they lied to you about the nature of the investment. It's your word against theirs. I left that office feeling like a fugitive criminal in my own life. I had lost more than money. I had lost faith in family love, in human decency, in the basic justice that should protect a mother from the children she raised with such sacrifice. That night, sitting in my courtyard under the Charleston stars, I made another decision that would change my life forever. If my family had decided to treat me like a stranger, I was going to act like one. The next day, I hired the best family law attorney in the city, not to recover the stolen money, that was already gone, but to protect what I had left. It was time for Michael and Tiffany to discover that their goose that laid the golden eggs had learned to fight back, and that when a 69-year-old woman decides to stop being a victim, she can become something far more dangerous than any family predator could imagine. The meeting with my lawyer, Attorney Thomas Reynolds, was a brutal awakening. His office in the upscale legal district of Charleston smelled of expensive leather and power, but his words brought me back to a reality I had been denying for months. I was not just a victim of fraud, but of a much deeper family conspiracy. Mrs. Hayes, he said while reviewing the documents Robert had collected, what we have here is a pattern of systematic manipulation, but there's something else you need to know before deciding how to proceed. Thomas opened a different folder, full of official papers with seals and signatures I didn't recognize. Your son filed a petition with a family court 6 months ago. He is requesting legal guardianship over you due to cognitive decline and irresponsible financial decision-making. The words hit me like a physical slap. I felt the air escape my lungs, and the room began to spin slowly. Guardianship? What are you talking about? It's a legal process that allows a family member to take total control over the finances and important decisions of a person who is supposedly no longer able to care for themselves. If the petition succeeds, you would lose the right to manage your own money, your properties, even your medical decisions. Thomas showed me the documentation. There was my son's signature, clear and unequivocal, formally requesting that I be declared incapable of managing my own life. According to these documents, your son argues that you have shown signs of mental confusion, that you have made wire transfers without logical criteria, and that you need legal protection against people who might take advantage of your supposed vulnerability. The irony was so bitter, it almost made me laugh. Michael was using the money he had stolen from me as evidence that I was mentally incapable, painting himself as the concerned son trying to protect me from scammers, when he himself was the primary scammer. What chances does he have of winning this process? I asked, although part of me didn't want to hear the answer. Honestly, they are high. Judges tend to be conservative in these cases. They prefer to protect the elderly, even if it means taking away their autonomy. Furthermore, your son hired one of the best family law firms in the country. They are investing a lot of money in this process. A lot of money. My own money, probably. But we have one advantage, Thomas continued. The fact that you hired a private investigator and are here talking to me demonstrates mental clarity and the capacity to make rational decisions. We can use that to our benefit. I left that meeting feeling like a criminal fugitive in my own life. Every decision I made, every move I took, could be used as evidence against me. If I bought something expensive, they would say I was squandering money irresponsibly. If I stayed home, they would argue I was isolating myself due to mental deterioration. If I went out too much, they would claim I lacked judgment to evaluate dangerous situations. Paranoia became my constant companion. I started obsessively checking my mail, fearing I would find legal summons. I secretly recorded every phone conversation with my children, just in case I needed evidence that my mind was working perfectly. I stopped answering the door when I wasn't expecting visitors, afraid they might be social workers sent by the court to evaluate my mental state. The final blow came one afternoon in March, when Sarah showed up at my house accompanied by a woman I didn't know. My daughter's eyes were red, and she wore an expression of guilt she tried to conceal with nervousness. "Mom, I want you to meet Dr. Patricia Ramirez. She's a psychogeriatric specialist. Michael and I thought it would be good for you to talk to someone about, how you've been feeling lately. Dr. Ramirez was a woman in her 40s with a professional smile and calculating gaze. She carried a digital recorder in her bag and a printed questionnaire I immediately recognized. It was the same type of evaluation they had used on my neighbor, Mrs. Perkins, before declaring her incompetent and putting her in a nursing home. "Just a few simple questions, Mrs. Hayes," the doctor said with that sweet voice adults use to talk to children. "Nothing complicated. We just want to make sure you're okay." I immediately understood what was happening. This informal visit was actually a covert psychiatric evaluation designed to collect evidence Michael could use in the guardianship proceedings. Every word I said, every reaction I had, would be analyzed and potentially distorted to support the narrative that I was a confused elderly woman who needed supervision. "Sarah, did you know about the legal proceedings your brother initiated against me?" I asked directly. My daughter paled and avoided my gaze. "Mom, we just want what's best for you. We've noticed you've been very different lately. More distrustful, more isolated. Tiffany says that." "Tiffany again," I finally exploded. "Since when do the opinions of a thief matter more than my own word?" Dr. Ramirez quickly took notes. She probably wrote something like, "Episode of aggression and paranoia toward daughter-in-law." "Mrs. Hayes," the psychiatrist intervened, "I understand that these changes in the family can be difficult to accept. It's normal for people your age to feel resistant when their adult children try to help them." "Help me? Do you think stealing $4 million from me is helping me?" Sarah and the doctor exchanged a meaningful look. To them, my accusation about the stolen money was not evidence of a real crime, but a symptom of persecutory delusions typical of cognitive decline. "Mom, we talked about that. Michael explained that you gave him that money voluntarily for an investment that didn't work out. He's just as hurt as you are about that loss." "Hurt? Hurt while he's transferring $2.8 million to his personal account? What are you talking about?" "That's not true, Mom." I showed them the photographs and bank documents Robert had collected. Sarah reviewed them with a confused expression, while the doctor took more notes, likely about my obsession with non-existent conspiracies. "This must be a mistake," Sarah murmured. "Michael would never do anything like this." "Of course not," I replied bitterly. "The perfect child you all idolize is incapable of lying, right? Better to believe your mother is going insane." The evaluation continued for 2 more hours. Seemingly innocent questions about dates, names, daily routines, all designed to detect signs of dementia or mental confusion. I answered each one with absolute precision, but I knew my defensive tone and obvious anger would be interpreted as evidence of psychological issues. When they finally left, I was alone in my living room, surrounded by the silence that had become the soundtrack to my new life. For the first time since everything began, I felt something stronger than sadness or betrayal. I felt pure fury. That night, I called Michael's cell phone. It rang many times before he answered with an irritated voice. "What's wrong, Mom?" "It's 11 o'clock at night. I want you to come to the house tomorrow. We need to talk." "I can't. I have work commitments I cannot cancel. I'm managing a $50 million cryptocurrency investment portfolio." "Then cancel them. You either come tomorrow or you never set foot in this house again." There was a long silence. "Are you threatening me?" "I am informing you. You have 24 hours to decide if you want to be my son or my enemy. There is no middle ground anymore." I hung up before he could respond. It was time for my family to learn that the sweet, submissive woman they had known for 69 years had died on Halloween night, and the woman who had been born in her place had nothing left to lose. Michael arrived at 2 in the afternoon the next day, driving his black BMW that he had bought with a portion of the family investment dividends I had financed for years. I watched him park from my bedroom window and felt a strange mixture of maternal love and deep disgust. He was my son, the creature who had grown in my womb, but he was also the man who had betrayed me with a coldness I never thought possible. I walked downstairs slowly, mentally preparing myself for the most difficult conversation of my life. Michael walked in using his key as if nothing had changed, as if having free access to my house was his natural right and not a privilege that could be revoked. "Mom, I hope this is important. he said without even greeting me, checking his gold watch. I had to postpone a video conference with Japanese investors who are moving capital into the digital gold market. I watched him as he spoke. He wore an Italian suit that cost more than many working families' monthly salaries, leather shoes that shone like mirrors, and an attitude of superiority that felt completely alien to me. When had my son turned into this version of himself? When had he learned to speak to his mother as if she were an employee wasting his time? "Sit down, Michael," I said, pointing to the living room sofa. "I prefer to stand. Like I said, I have important commitments. Sit down," I repeated, this time with a tone that allowed no argument. Something in my voice must have alerted him, because he finally sat down, though he maintained that tense posture of someone ready to bolt at any moment. I pulled out the folder Attorney Reynolds had prepared for me and placed it on the coffee table between us. It contained copies of all the bank documents, the photographs of Tiffany at the bank, the records of transfers to offshore accounts, and, most importantly, the guardianship petition he had filed against me. "Explain this to me," I said, opening the folder to the page showing his signature requesting my legal incapacitation. Michael visibly paled. For a few seconds, the confident executive disappeared, and I could see the frightened boy he had been when I scolded him for breaking something or lying about his grades. "How did you get that?" he asked, his voice trembling. "That's not the right question, son. The question is, why is my own son trying to declare me mentally incapable to steal what little I have left?" "I'm not trying to steal anything from you," he replied, but his voice no longer held the authority it had before. "That process is to protect you from yourself. You've been making very questionable financial decisions lately." The hypocrisy of that statement took my breath away. There he was, using my own stolen money as evidence of my mental incompetence, portraying himself as the concerned son who only wanted to protect me. Questionable decisions like giving your wife $4 million for a phantom investment? You gave her that money voluntarily. No one forced you, under false pretenses. They lied to me about the nature of the investment. That's your version of events, Mom. You don't have proof that anyone deceived you. I opened the folder to the pages showing the wire transfers to his personal account. "And what is this, Michael? Is this also my version of events?" This time, the silence was long and heavy. Michael looked at the documents with the expression of a cornered animal, desperately seeking an explanation that might sound convincing. "Tiffany asked me to help her manage those funds temporarily. There are very complicated tax regulations for international investments. She needed to use a national account to facilitate the transfers." "And why is the money still in your account after 2 months?" "Because the project got complicated. We are looking for alternative investment opportunities that offer a better return. My contact in Dubai is helping me explore opportunities in the cryptocurrency market that could multiply the initial capital." He lied with the fluency of someone who had perfected the art of deception over years. But I was no longer the naive mother who believed every word of her perfect son. "Michael, I'm 69 years old, not 99. My mind is working perfectly, and I understand very well what is happening here." I stood up and walked toward the window overlooking the courtyard. From there, I could see the garden Richard and I had planted together, the rose bushes that bloomed every spring without fail, the quarry stone fountain that had been our 20th anniversary gift. "You and your wife decided I was a foolish old woman with too much money and too little judgment. You systematically planned to rob me, first through deception, then with legal proceedings designed to take away control of my own life." "Mom, you're being paranoid. Don't interrupt me," I yelled, surprising him and myself with the force of my voice. "For 69 years, I've patiently listened to everyone. Today, you are going to listen to me." Michael sank into the sofa, finally understanding that this conversation was not going to unfold as he had expected. "I worked alongside your father for 40 years to build this wealth. I lived in smaller houses than we could afford to save money for your education. I wore used clothes for decades so you could dress well and not feel inferior to your classmates." The words flowed out of me like a river that had been contained for too long. "When your father died, I could have sold everything and gone to live my life quietly anywhere in the world. But I stayed here, protecting the family assets, keeping them intact so that you all would have financial security when I was gone." "Mom, I'm not finished yet. I paid for Sarah's college when her husband lost his job. I financed your master's degree in international finance. I covered my grandchildren's medical expenses when they had health issues. Never, in my entire life, did I deny you anything that was within my power to give. I turned around to look him directly in the eyes. And you repaid me with betrayal, lies, and a conspiracy to declare me insane and take everything I have left. Michael had tears in his eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were from genuine remorse or frustration at being discovered. It wasn't my idea, Mom. This was all Tiffany's plan. She convinced me that you were losing your mental faculties, that someone could take advantage of you if we didn't intervene in time. And the money in your account? Was that her idea too? She told me it was temporary, that she needed to protect the funds while we found the best investment opportunity. I thought I was genuinely looking out for your interests. More lies, or perhaps half-truths, which can be worse than full lies because they contain enough reality to seem credible. Michael, I'm going to ask you one simple question, and I want an honest answer. Do you believe in the bottom of your heart that I have lost my mental faculties? The silence stretched for almost a minute. I could see the internal struggle on his face, the conflict between admitting he had knowingly participated in fraud or maintaining the fiction that he had been protecting an incompetent mother. No, he finally whispered. I don't believe you've lost your faculties. Then you acknowledge that the guardianship proceeding is fraudulent. Yes. And you acknowledge that the money was obtained through deception. Yes. For the first time in months, I felt like I was talking to my real son, not the corrupted version Tiffany had helped create. Very well. Now you have a chance to choose who you want to be. The man I raised to be honorable, or the accomplice of a scam artist who happens to be married to you. Michael covered his face with his hands. His crying was silent but genuine. I don't know how to fix this, Mom. Things got out of control, and now I don't know how to stop them. You start by returning the money you have in your account. Then you withdraw the guardianship petition. And finally, you decide if your marriage is worth more than your integrity. Tiffany will go crazy if I do that. She already spent part of the money on... I don't care what she spent it on. That money wasn't hers to spend. I looked at him for a long moment, truly seeing my son for the first time in years. Beneath the expensive suit and arrogant demeanor, the boy I had raised with so much love and hope was still there. You have 3 days to decide, Michael. Either you fix this, or I am going to fix it in a way you are not going to like at all. The 3 days I gave Michael turned into a countdown toward my own liberation. Every hour that passed without news from him was another confirmation that he had chosen to protect his wife instead of doing right by his mother. By noon on the 3rd day, when my phone remained silent, I knew the time had come to execute the plan I had been developing with Thomas Reynolds. The first call was to the main bank where I kept my savings and investment accounts. I asked to speak directly with the director, Mr. Maurice Sterling, who had known my family since Richard and I were young clients with bigger dreams than our resources. Mrs. Hayes, it's a pleasure to hear from you, he said with that professional warmth reserved for clients managing multi-million-dollar portfolios. How can I assist you? I need to freeze all my accounts immediately. I also want to revoke any power of attorney or authorization I have granted to third parties to access my funds. There was an uncomfortable pause. Ma'am, I understand your concern, but I must inform you that your son, Mr. Michael Hayes, submitted documentation this morning requesting access to your accounts due to a family emergency. My blood ran cold. Michael had decided to speed up his plans, likely pressured by Tiffany when they discovered I was investigating their activities. What kind of documentation? A temporary power of attorney, backed by a medical report suggesting cognitive impairment on your part. According to the document, you no longer have the capacity to make significant financial decisions. Dr. Ramirez. Her informal visit had been exactly what I suspected. An evaluation designed to generate the medical document Michael needed to access my money without waiting for the formal court process. Mr. Sterling, that document is fraudulent. I have not authorized any power of attorney, and my mental capacity is perfect, as you can verify in this very conversation. Mrs. Hayes, I understand your position, but the bank has very strict protocols. When we receive medical documentation indicating cognitive incapacity, we are obligated to protect the client's interests, even if the client in question disagrees. It was a Kafkaesque nightmare. The system designed to protect me was being used to destroy me, and my own mental lucidity was being interpreted as evidence of confusion. Very well, I said firmly. I want you to know that I will personally sue this bank if it allows anyone to access my funds without my express authorization. I have attorneys who will make this institution pay dearly for participating in a family fraud. Ma'am, there's no need for threats. It's not a threat, Mr. Sterling. It's a promise. I hung up and immediately called Thomas Reynolds. Thomas, I need an emergency court order to protect my assets. My son is trying to access my accounts using fraudulent documentation. Understood. I can have a temporary order in 2 hours. But I need you to come to my office immediately to sign the documents. As I prepared to leave, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Tiffany standing at my door. But this time she didn't wear her fake smile or her superior attitude. Her face showed pure panic. I opened the door but kept the security chain in place. What do you want, Tiffany? We need to talk, Mrs. Eleanor. I think there's been a very serious misunderstanding about some financial transactions. There is no misunderstanding. There is theft. And there is a scam artist standing at my door. Please, let me explain. Everything has a logical explanation. I looked at her through the crack in the door. Her perfect makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes or the trembling in her hands. Evidently, Robert Martinez had done more than just investigate. He had also alerted the relevant authorities about the money movement to offshore accounts. The only explanation I accept is the full return of my money and your permanent exit from our lives. That's not possible. The money is already tied up in investments that cannot be liquidated immediately. But I can guarantee you will recover every dollar with substantial interest. More lies. But this time spoken with the desperation of someone who knows their house of cards is about to collapse. Tiffany, I'm going to tell you one thing only. You have 24 hours to return every dollar you stole, or I will have you arrested for fraud, felony theft, and elder manipulation. Your face will appear in every Charleston newspaper as the woman who robbed her own mother-in-law. You can't do that to me. I have rights. You had rights when you were part of this family. You lost them when you decided to become a criminal. I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling my heart pound with a force I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't fear I felt, but a kind of wild energy, as if I had been sleeping for decades and was finally waking up. The drive to Thomas's office was revealing. Charleston looked different from my new perspective. Brighter, more full of possibilities. It was as if I had been viewing the city through a gray filter for years, and suddenly someone had cleaned the glass. Thomas already had all the documents prepared when I arrived. Eleanor, I secured the temporary protective order. No bank can allow access to your accounts without your physical presence and direct authorization. I also filed a criminal complaint against your daughter-in-law for fraud and money laundering. What exactly does that mean? It means Tiffany Vance is going to be arrested within the next 48 hours. Moving funds to undeclared offshore accounts constitutes a very serious federal crime. She could face up to 10 years in prison. For the first time in months, I genuinely smiled. And Michael? His situation is more complicated. Technically, he received money transfers from his wife, not directly from you. We can demonstrate that he participated in the scheme, but it will be harder to prove direct criminal intent. I don't want him to go to jail, I said without hesitation, but I do want him to understand the consequences of his decisions. That night, while eating dinner alone in my courtyard under the stars, I received a call from Michael. His voice was broken, desperate. Mom, please, I need you to stop all this. Tiffany is hysterical. She says they're going to arrest her tomorrow. That's likely. Fraud is a serious offense, son. But this will destroy our marriage, my professional reputation, everything we've built. You destroyed that when you decided to rob me. I'm just enforcing the consequences. I'll return the money, all of it, down to the last dollar. But please, withdraw the complaint. All the money? Including what Tiffany spent? Yes, all of it. I'll sell my car, liquidate my personal investments, take out loans if necessary, but I'll return everything. I thought about it for a long moment. Part of me wanted to see Tiffany face the full consequences of her actions. But another part, the mother who still loved her son despite everything, knew that completely ruining his life wouldn't bring back my money or my dignity. Very well. You have 72 hours to transfer the full $4 million to my account. When I confirm the money is there, I will withdraw the complaint against Tiffany. And after that, you and your wife will sign a legal document relinquishing any right to my assets, present or future. And you will move away from Charleston. I never want to see her again. Mom, there is no discussion, Michael. Those are my terms. Take them or leave them. I hung up before he could respond. 3 days later, my bank account showed the full balance again. Michael had sold his BMW, liquidated his cryptocurrency portfolio, and emptied his investment accounts to comply with my ultimatum. But the most important thing wasn't the recovered money. It was the feeling of power I had rediscovered after decades of letting others make decisions for me. For the first time in my adult life, I had fought for myself, and I had won. The day Michael and Tiffany came to sign the documents relinquishing their claim to my assets, the atmosphere in my house felt dense, like before a storm. I had summoned them at 3 p.m, the time when the Charleston sun enters the dining room windows and fills the house with that golden light that had always brought me peace. But that day, the light seemed to expose every crack, every irreparable fracture in what had once been a family. Thomas Reynolds arrived half an hour earlier with his leather briefcase, and that serious expression he adopted for the most delicate moments of his work. We had reviewed the content of the documents several times the previous week. An irrevocable waiver of any inheritance rights, a legal prohibition from approaching my residence within 100 yards, and a specific clause requiring them to move out of the state of South Carolina within no more than 30 days. Eleanor, are you sure you want to include the banishment clause? Thomas had asked during our last meeting. It's quite extreme and could complicate long-term family relationships. The family relationships are already destroyed, Thomas. What I am doing is protecting myself from future manipulation. When the doorbell rang promptly at 3 o'clock, my heart raced, but my mind remained clear. I had spent too many years allowing emotions to cloud my judgment. No more. Michael entered first, and I was struck by how much he had changed in recent weeks. The confident executive had disappeared, replaced by a man who looked like he had aged 5 years in just a few weeks. His suit, though still expensive, looked wrinkled. His eyes had the lost look of someone who had bet everything and lost. Tiffany came in behind him, and the transformation was even more dramatic. The woman who had once entered my house like a conquering queen now looked like a refugee. Her hair, always perfectly styled, was pulled back in a careless ponytail. She wore no makeup, and without it, she looked years older and much more vulnerable. "Hello, Mom," Michael muttered, avoiding my gaze. "Mrs. Eleanor." Tiffany greeted me in a voice barely audible. "Sit down," I told them, pointing to the chairs I had strategically placed on the opposite side of the dining room table, so they faced Thomas and me, like defendants before a tribunal. Thomas opened his briefcase and pulled out 3 copies of each document. The papers looked imposing with their official seals and legal letterhead, but to me, they represented something far more important than legal formalities. They represented my liberation. "Before you sign," I told them, "I want you to understand exactly what is happening here. This isn't just a renunciation of money or property. This is the end of you as part of my family." Tiffany began to cry silently. The tears were genuine, not the manipulative weeping she had used so many times to get her way. "Mrs. Eleanor, I know I made terrible mistakes," she whispered, "but please, don't force us to leave Charleston. This is our city. Our jobs are here. Our friends. You should have thought about that before you stole from me," I replied without a trace of compassion in my voice. It wasn't my intention to hurt anyone. I wanted financial security. I come from a very poor family, ma'am. You don't know what it's like to grow up with nothing. I had nothing when I was young either, Tiffany. Richard and I built this wealth dime by dime, working 18-hour days for decades. The difference is, we did it honestly. Thomas cleared his throat gently, reminding us we were here for a legal proceeding, not a family therapy session. "Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Vance, I need you to carefully read every clause before signing." Once these documents are signed and notarized, they will be legally binding and irreversible. Michael took the first document with trembling hands. It was the waiver of inheritance rights, a 3-page text that basically removed him from my will permanently. "Mom, do you really want me to sign this?" he asked, his voice broken. "I'm your son. I made mistakes, but I'm still your son." For the first time in this entire nightmare, I felt my resolve waver. The voice wasn't that of the arrogant executive who had tried to scam me, but that of the child I had raised with such love, the one who used to hug me when he had nightmares and told me I was the best mom in the world. But then I remembered the guardianship petition, the legal documents in which he had requested I be declared mentally incompetent, and my heart hardened again. "You signed your own dismissal when you decided to betray me, Michael. I'm just making official what you already executed in practice." He read the entire document, line by line, as if expecting to find some legal loophole that would allow him to maintain at least one future connection with me. When he reached the bottom, where the space for his signature lay, he remained motionless for several minutes. "What will happen to my children if I have them in the future?" he finally asked. "Will they never know their grandmother either?" That question hurt more than expected. The possibility of having grandchildren I would never meet, of my lineage continuing without me, was a price I hadn't fully considered when designing my revenge. "That will depend on you," I replied. "If you ever demonstrate that you can be the man of integrity I thought I raised, we might revisit certain aspects of these agreements. But that will be my decision, not your right." Michael signed with the trembling hand of someone signing his own social death warrant. He then passed the documents to Tiffany, who signed them without even reading, resigned to accepting whatever punishment I imposed. The notary public Thomas had brought to formalize the signatures finished his work in professional silence. He was an older gentleman who had likely witnessed thousands of similar family tragedies, and his neutral expression suggested he had learned not to judge his client's decisions. When all the documents were signed, sealed, and formalized, Thomas carefully put them away in his briefcase. It was like watching the remains of a relationship that had lasted 45 years, from the day Michael was born until this moment of definitive rupture, being archived. "You have 30 days to move out of South Carolina," I reminded them. "If you remain in the state after that date, you will face additional legal consequences." Michael and Tiffany stood to leave, but before reaching the door, my son stopped and turned to look at me one last time. "Mom, I want you to know I understand why you're doing this, and I want you to know that despite everything, I really do love you." His words pierced me like daggers. For a moment, I was tempted to run to him, hug him, and tell him we could find a way to fix everything. But the woman who had been betrayed so many times was no longer the same one who had raised that boy. "If you truly loved me, Michael, you never would have allowed us to reach this point," I replied. When the door closed behind them, I was left alone in my dining room with Thomas, surrounded by a silence that felt completely different from the heavy silence of the past months. It wasn't the heavy silence of betrayal and humiliation, but something lighter, cleaner. "How does it feel?" Thomas asked me as he packed up his things. "Like breathing for the first time in years," I replied, and I was surprised to realize it was completely true. That night, for the first time since Halloween, I had dinner in my formal dining room instead of the kitchen. I set the table with the china I had inherited from my mother, lit candles, and poured myself a glass of expensive Napa Valley Cabernet that Richard had been saving for a special occasion that never came. The special occasion was this: the first day of the rest of my life, free from manipulators, free from lies, free from the burden of loving people who had chosen to hate me. As I ate dinner alone by candlelight, I silently toasted the woman who had been capable of defending herself when no one else would. And for the first time in decades, that woman was me.